Hello, I'm Dr. John Pelletieri, President and co-founder of the International Society for Emotional Intelligence. And I'm pleased to bring this fourth episode of our ongoing series, Conversations in Emotional Intelligence, using EI to cope with the COVID-19 crisis. I'd like to introduce my co-hosts, Paul Edwards, an EI specialist who is the co-founder and co-director of the Emotional Intelligence Urban Initiative, which is a special program to bring EI into urban communities. And also Dr. Fritz Gillette, clinical psychologist in practice in New York City, and who has hosted several TV and radio shows on psychology of everyday life. And as a way of expanding our series, we have another guest today who's going to give us a perspective on the COVID-19 crisis. And hopefully through our conversation, we'll see how emotional intelligence can be useful in helping all of us get through this crisis. So I'd like to introduce Deidre Olivera, who is an advocate and a community activist who advocates for women's issues and life skills. She was editor of a local newspaper. She's a business owner and someone who has experienced the COVID-19 virus itself. So Deidre, thank you so much for joining our show.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. No, you offer a unique perspective, and I'm sure people listening would like to hear about your experiences and understand how you were able to cope and how you've gotten through so far.
Okay. I don't know what point you want me to start at, but
well, share your experience with COVID-19 from it's become, since it has become, or when it became something very impacting to the community, and how has it impacted you?
Okay. Well, I would say, ironically, I was one of those people who I thought, because I didn't have any underlying conditions and I'm normally very healthy, I didn't think I'd be able to get COVID-19. And since you mentioned COVID-19, just for the record, I'd like to clarify, because I think that we use these titles interchangeably and they're not. So coronavirus, right, as we know, is like the heading. It's the title of a bunch of viruses which fall underneath that: SARS, MRSA, right? And then from coronavirus, you have actually this particular virus is called like SARS-V2 or something like that. But that's the name, right? And then COVID-19 is the disease that you get once you get the SARS virus. So everyone that gets the coronavirus doesn't actually get COVID-19, but I actually happened to get COVID-19 because it affected my lungs. Yeah. So,
how did this unravel? When did you realize that there was a problem, that you had that bad situation in front of you?
So I'm under my job title, right, is under the essential workers function. I mean, under the essential workers title. Everyone isn't a nurse or a doctor. That's an essential worker. There are a whole bunch of other, job titles that are essential workers. And so I had to get on the train every day, and I had to go in the office every day. And being in the office, I think the statistics are something like 1 in 4 people actually have the virus. And so in a closed environment like an office, you can kind of imagine how rapidly it started spreading. And so before I knew it, it started very simple with me being tired. Just coming home and going, man, I'm really tired. I mean, unbelievably tired. To having gastrointestinal distress. And I think that's something they should mention. A lot of times, one of the first signs of getting the COVID-19 virus or having the SARS is gastrointestinal distress. And that took me from just having that distress and going, wow, I'm tired, and I don't feel good, to literally on my hands and knees, gasping for air with the room spinning just that quickly. And ended up going to the hospital because I felt like someone was stepping in my chest. Mm-hmm.
Well, that sounds absolutely awful. I could only imagine.
Up until this point in the program that we're doing here, Deidre, the three of us have been talking about emotional intelligence and coping with COVID. So I'm happy to have you here as someone who's experienced it to give us perspective on what that was like for you. And it sounds like that was, I agree with John, that's pretty horrible to have gone through that experience. What's it like for you now recovering?
Oh, okay. I'm going to say, well, ironically, that was the first time I got sick. I ended up in the hospital twice behind this. And I think the difference that I found between people who were going to survive and people who probably didn't make it really had to do with thought. You know, what thoughts you allowed into your body, not panicking. My main concern, actually, when I went in the hospital was I will not become fearful. And that's what I kept saying to myself, I will not become fearful, because even as people came in, they were so fearful. They were breathing and, hyperventilating. They couldn't get air. And fear, I don't know if people understand the effects that fear has on the body, but your body produces adrenaline and cortisol, right? And so the adrenaline actually decreases blood flow to the brain. It increases your heart rate, and the cortisol doesn't help, right? So staying out of a fearful mindset was, like I said, the most important thing, because you had to make decisions. I don't know, just from what I experienced, I think a lot of the doctors are probably going to need a little bit of mental health after this, because I think, when you walk in, they're like, listen, we don't know what to tell you, but all we know is people are taking a very quick turn and they're dying. And that was like the first word I heard going into the hospital from the doctors. So they're really, really going through some emotional issues that we're gonna have to deal with as a country overall. To fast forward now, how it's affecting me now is it's a process. I'm still trying to work through my lungs, breathing with my lungs, and just trying to make sense of it all and stay rational and know that there's been a lot of loss and people have experienced loss, but we have to stay positive and also stay focused on the conditions which created the COVID-19.
Contained in when you were describing your response, you said that you made a decision not to be fearful. And I'm wondering if we could look into that a little bit, because in part of EI talk, we are often talking about being able to direct yourself toward a feeling. And you're saying you were able to direct yourself away from a feeling. Did you have another feeling in mind when you were saying that to yourself?
Yeah. I'm very spiritually grounded, as well as, I also am involved with pranic healing and energy. And so the other thoughts that I had in my mind really were being able to stay focused, know that the doctors were kind of making decisions, the nurses were kind of making decisions, everyone's under this pressure. And if I get under the pressure too, I'm not able to manage my own care. And you don't think about going in a hospital as managing your own care. But, when you go in there, first of all, you have a fever, they're giving you a lot of Tylenol, right? And you have to maintain the amount of Tylenol. Actually, I started almost getting liver damage from the amount of Tylenol. Knowing that you have to stay focused enough that when they go, okay, we're going to ventilate you. If you are able to not be ventilated, then you say no. They wanted to put me on oxygen at 10, and I seen that some people were getting nosebleeds. I mean, like at 7. Some people getting nosebleeds at 7 because of the oxygen. So I could be fearful or I could stay focused. Okay, staying focused is, well, let's see how long I can continue to breathe on room air and use oxygen when necessary. And so it was actually a comprehensive dialogue that had to take place even while I was in the hospital, or else I could have, I believe, found myself in a different situation. So rather than fear, was focus, and focus on the fact that I'm energy, I am spirit, and although my body was going through these changes, I had to maintain that inner focus on being well and letting my body do what it needed to do.
So you've really embodied, Deidre, you've really embodied the essence of emotional intelligence right there. Embracing fearfulness would not have been the most intelligent emotion in that context. And I like how you said you shifted from fearfulness into focus and on being healthy and keeping a positive mindset. And that contributed to a certain degree to the recovery process and the treatment process.
Yeah, I think that's 100%, because Emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and it's an ability that we can develop. I don't know what your level of EI was prior to this incident, Deidre.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had training in emotional intelligence prior to this incident, but the thing is that you were aware of how you were feeling when you went in, and you're talking about a self-regulation strategy. Because of the mindset that you had, you were self-regulating, understanding that if you did not self-regulate, it would make your sickness or your illness more severe from a mental perspective, you know, from a coping perspective. So you have self-awareness, and you have regulation strategies, and you talked about breathing, and then now you still have some physical issues. So what happens with that? Your body is your information. Body provides information. When you're under duress currently, that means you're constantly having to be aware of how you're feeling or how your body's feeling, and you're constantly having to regulate your emotions because of the duress on your body. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. Um, you said that you don't know about my experience with emotional intelligence. I think it's a learned it's a learned behavior.
My thought was that you had two visits to the hospital. So I'm wondering, your first visit emotionally, what was your state of mind, and in your second visit, did your EI become better in your second visit because you had to, or was it something that you possessed in your first visit? Does that make sense? In your first visit,
It does.
So case in point, do you think that you acquired better EI skills in your second visit and better regulation skills in your second visit?
You know what? So I think we had discussed that. Is it something that can be passed down through family generations and, you know, as a learned behavior? Believe it or not, my first visit was a little bit more concerted because I knew what it was. I was prepared. You know, when I went to the hospital to say, okay, well, let's see if I have it or not, because I wasn't sure. Whereas my second visit, when they took me out on a stretcher because my pneumonia was getting worse, I believe that when my fear response tried to kick in, that my, as you say, emotional intelligence response got a lot higher because I was thinking, hey, you know what? I might not come out this time, right? Because I wasn't expecting to be brought out on a stretcher, and mine had gotten so bad. Like I said, I couldn't walk 4 steps without my oxygen plummeting and my heart going into tachycardia. And that was like, okay. So I guess at that point in time, I was like, okay, this is an emergency 911. And when I go in the hospital, like I said, as they were taking me on the stretcher, I just was determined that I was going to stay focused on my health care because I intended on coming out. I didn't know if I was or not, but that was my intent. And so with that being in mind, like I said, I was very involved in what I would accept and what I wouldn't. They offered me stronger antivirals. I said, I deny that. Like I said, they offered, oh, you know, you can be put on I said, nope, I deny that as well. So it really, the second time was actually, I was more focused than the first time. The first time I just was kind of like, hey, I'm sick. I don't know, you know, what should we do? And the second time I was like, okay, I know my body, and a lot of people are dying. A lot of people aren't making it out of this. And I'm just intent on the fact that, yeah, I want to come out. I want to come home.
But prior to COVID-19, though, you had certain life practices that you mentioned, certain spiritual practices, which helped you, I would assume, in dealing with the stress and the regulation that you needed. And so we talk about triggers. When we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about triggers. Do you know your triggers? So I would think because of your life practice, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because of the life practices and spiritual practices you had prior to COVID-19, it helped you with whatever negative triggers may have come up during your crisis. Yay?
Okay. I'm smiling for a few reasons. I don't know if you noticed my throat, but I am actually like, I have my oxygen on now, and I'm kind of measuring out how I'm breathing, what I say, and we're going to make it to the end of this podcast. But if you see my throat just doing strange things, just know that I am working it out as we talk. That's why I'm laughing. But in regards to your question, I would like to say, I think that growing up in the inner city actually prepares you more in certain ways for emotional intelligence. And I think I've always said to myself, I've seen people that have gotten shot one time and died, and people who have gotten shot 7 times and lived, right? And so it's really about, I've learned early on, it's about the mindset of, hey, my mindset is always, I didn't plan on dying today. And believe it or not, I could be 100 and I'd be saying the same thing. I don't plan on dying today. And I think that is really the most important factor when it comes to who dies, who lives, who's successful, and who's not. It's really about your mindset, you know, and that's just a mindset that I grew up with. Like I said, coming out of an inner city environment of, yeah, it's a survival skill.
That's emotional intelligence in practice. When you talk about mindset, you mentioned earlier you have a sense of spirituality, and that's a resource for you. And those elements create a more positive and hopeful emotion. That you are going to make it, you're determined to make it. That determination is an important feeling and an important motivator. And even though the second hospitalization, it was actually, you were concerned. You know, this is pretty serious. So you weren't ignoring the reality of how serious this was, but with that, you had this mindset and this sense of determination, which I think is a real positive and intelligent emotional state to take with you. It was very impressive.
I was concerned. I was also angry, believe it or not.
That's understandable.
I was angry at COVID-19, and I was like, out of all the ways to go, this will not be it. I had to have, I call it, I might write a memoir. It's called Conversations with God.
Okay. Well, the fact that you're here, Deidre, is evidence that your determination has paid off. You know, it's quite an impressive way to address this real serious crisis. Very impressive.
Thank you so much. Like I said, it's about higher power and connecting to that energy, but thank you.
Deidre,
Yes.
another level, if EI is taking place at a good level, John can correct me, at a good level or at a high level, we manage our emotions and we can manage other people's emotions. We can influence other people's emotions and manage other people's emotions for better or worse. But with the interaction that you had with the people on the front line, healthcare workers on the front line, doctors and nurses, do you think that they manage their emotions and they manage other people or the patient's emotions well? Or could you see the stress in their interaction through it in the exchange, in the back and forth, how they dealt with it?
Oh, that's, you know what, I'm so torn. I'm torn in my loyalties because I went to Mount Sinai. I don't know if I can mention their name, but I thought that the level of proficiency that they exercised with the amount of people that were deathly ill was phenomenal, right? And so I mean, just as far as getting people in, getting people at least, because I couldn't get the COVID-19 test, so they chest x-rayed me first. They saw the COVID-19 pneumonia, and I mean, just how fast they were getting people, moving them around, changing the whole hospital to facilitate the amount of people was marvelous. So that's why I said I'm a little torn in my loyalty, because on the other hand, everyone was stressed. Like I said, the doctors were stressed. The nurses were stressed. Were they making the best decisions? I'm not sure. I think a lot of them, as they express it's the first time or perhaps the most complex time, they have such a vast number of people who are injured and not having any footprint of what they could do towards working towards the cure, right? So having to kind of throw things out there like, hey, maybe we should try this or maybe we should try that. And knowing that a hospital environment is built not so much towards a holistic perspective as far as things to heal the body. So I think with them having to depend just on medications, like I said, in the sheer volume, I can't exactly say that everyone handled it well. I can just say I'm grateful, right? But I don't really think that it was being handled well. There was something, I could say something simple. The nurse came in the room to give me Robitussin, and she went over to the computer with her gloves and she stuck her finger in to open it. And she handed it to me. And I said, I'm not going to drink that. She said, why? I said, you just put your finger in it. You know, she didn't, so to take the tab to open it, right? Like I said, I had an experience with the Tylenol. I was getting Tylenol 4 times a day, right? Every 6 hours, which is 4,000 milligrams. And then while I'm in the hospital, I looked up what is the max amount, and it was 3,000 per day. My fever was so bad, I had been taking Tylenol for 10 days. So when they said, hey, your liver's affected, I said, you know, I spoke to my brother who's a doctor, thank God. And we discussed the Tylenol, and I told the doctor, I said, no, I've been taking 40,000 milligrams of Tylenol over 10 days. I think if my liver's affected, it's not because of the COVID-19, it's because of the Tylenol. I think we should stop the Tylenol unless my fever is a certain rate and see if it levels out. And the doctor looked at me and was like, oh, okay. And by the second day, the liver enzymes had kind of, you know, they leveled out. And I know now I probably need to stay off of Tylenol for quite a long period of time. But that's just the mindset. They were just, I think, mentally stressed out and overburdened with COVID-19, the vast amount of people that had it and what to do about it.
I have a question for John. John, we know the history of emotional intelligence, and it became popular with the Fortune 500 companies in the late 80s and 90s. And we talk about bedside manner. Doctors and nurses have a certain bedside manner. Mm-hmm. Do you think that would you think that hospitals have always have trained better in EI than the average corporation? You know, or do you think that maybe we need more EI training for it? You want to answer that question?
I know you asked John. I want John to answer.
Go for it, Deidre.
I am telling you, I think I don't know how widespread the whole concept of understanding emotional intelligence, knowing when to apply it and how to apply it is going to be, but I think this is definitely something, the emotional intelligence is something that is so needed in hospitals, with healthcare workers, even with frontline workers, as being the first people that should be trained with that, because it was so necessary.
Yeah. Well, to add my piece, I mean, Deidre, you're a good advocate for many things. You're an advocate for the community. You're definitely been an advocate for yourself in this crisis. And now you've been an advocate for emotional intelligence. So to answer Paul's question, I think EI is applicable everywhere. You know, there's a lot of people in the hospital systems who are very emotional intelligent, who care very much for their patients and go the extra mile. And then even, you know, in a crisis here, to do what they're doing under the duress of a crisis is that much more impressive. Of course, there's going to be mistakes and missteps anywhere. So I would say EI is applicable in all facets of society.
I mean, and I guess my question really is, we would like to think that in the healthcare industry, EI would be taught to its fullest compared to a DuPont or General Motors. Historically, I mean, has that been the case? You as a psychologist, have you seen? Do you think that they need more of it?
Well, it is increasing. I mean, there are more corporate companies using that. More people are looking at EI in hiring practices. There's a lot going on. I think it is increasing and growing globally, which is a good sign. But there's certainly more room for growth. But I do actually want to hear from Fritz. Do you have other comments on this or things to add before we start to wrap up?
I'm enjoying this dialogue and absorbing it fully, you know, because it's interesting to have had a few episodes already where we talked about EI from a conceptual and an intellectual place, but now to bring other people into the mix who are living an embodiment of it. Deidre, you're a natural. And your life experiences, as you pointed out, probably also prepped you. And probably going into the hospital a first time and then a second time took it further. I've been saying practice makes more proficient at this. But your resolve, your commitment to staying focused, staying healthy. I'm not going to die today. I love that. And so, yes, we're talking, you know, in this series about EI, and we're talking about the steps and the skills. But many people are walking around this world never having talked about the concepts and skills, and they got it. And then there are many industries that it's not talked about enough. So it's part of why we're doing this, so that we spread the word and we And I think the organization that John is the founder and head of, its purpose is to get people talking about it so that we can fill in the spaces where people don't have any idea. We can do these trainings for healthcare workers, police officers. I think some world leaders, most of them probably need a heck of a lot of training in this stuff. So thank you for coming on the episode.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And you need to finish up, but again, if anyone wants to see this episode or other episodes, go to the website, www.emotionalintelligencesociety.org. That's the website for the International Society. And I want to thank my co-hosts, Fritz and Paul, and a very special thank you to you, Deidre, for bringing so much perspective and depth to our series here. And I wish you well in your recovery.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.